Young Miami has always been bold, unfiltered, and unapologetically real. But no one expected what she would eventually say about the most powerful man in hip-hop, Sean Diddy Combs. For years, rumors swirled around Diddy's infamous private parties, extravagant, invitation-only nights of glamour, mystery, and whispers that were quickly silenced. But now, one of the closest people to him has stepped forward. And the truth might be darker than anyone ever imagined. It all started with a casual conversation, or so it seemed. Young Miami, sitting confidently in a velvet chair during an exclusive podcast appearance, suddenly paused. Her tone shifted. Her eyes wandered as if replaying something in her mind she hadn't wanted to revisit. "Those parties," she said slowly, "they weren't what everyone thinks." The interviewer leaned in. So did everyone watching. What followed was a subtle but loaded confession, the kind that sends shivers through a room. She didn't name names at first. She didn't have to. Her words were carefully chosen, but her face said everything. "There were rooms I was told not to enter," she said, "people I was told not to talk to, and things I saw that I still can't explain." She described golden halls, guards dressed like Secret Service, and guests who arrived in blacked-out vehicles under code names. Young Miami wasn't just another guest. She was Diddy's girl, and that gave her access others only dreamed of. But even she admitted there were parts of those nights that felt wrong. She mentioned strange themes. Some parties felt like cult rituals more than celebrations. Everyone wore white, no phones allowed, security everywhere, and rules, so many rules. We couldn't record anything, couldn't ask questions, couldn't leave until certain people had already gone. Her voice trembled slightly. "I saw things that didn't make sense, that I still think about late at night." At this point, the studio was dead silent. Everyone knew this was no ordinary gossip. This was something else, something deeper. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way, you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now let's get back to it. As she continued, the veil began to lift. She didn't just talk about the opulence, the fountains of champagne, or the $100,000 couches. She hinted at deeper secrets, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room, strange contracts people had to sign, and guests who looked terrified. Even when surrounded by luxury, one night stood out. She didn't say when it was or where exactly, but she remembered the atmosphere, colder, quieter, and far more controlled. "I felt like I was being watched," she admitted. "Not by Diddy, by something else. Like the whole thing was staged, and I was part of it without knowing." She went silent after that, looking off camera. She looked straight ahead and said, "That night changed everything for me." Her voice had lost its usual playfulness. There was no swagger now, just a heaviness, like she was finally letting go of something she'd carried too long. The room had gone completely still. Everyone knew what she was about to say would cross a line, one that no one around Diddy had ever dared to cross. "There was a room," she began, "not the main party area, not even near the guests. It was hidden behind a sliding wall near Diddy's private lounge. I followed someone. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. I heard music, but it was slower, darker. And then I saw them." She stopped, swallowed hard. It wasn't a party in there. It was something else. People were wearing masks, and not like party masks. These were weird, theatrical. Some looked almost ritualistic. They were gathered around someone sitting in a chair, like they were performing for him. That someone was Diddy. She described how no one seemed to notice her at first, or maybe they did, and just didn't care. "There were candles," she said, "and mirrors everywhere. The kind of setup you'd see in movies when they show secret societies or cult stuff. And the worst part? There were people crying, quietly, like they wanted to leave but couldn't." When she realized what she was seeing, she turned back, but not before Diddy made eye contact with her. His face didn't change. He didn't look surprised or angry. He just stared at me, like he was daring me to react. From that moment, everything shifted. She said security started following her more closely after that. Conversations with Diddy became colder. It felt like he knew I knew, she said, and he was testing whether I'd stay quiet. But it wasn't just her experience that haunted her. After that night, she started noticing things about the other women who were regulars at the parties. The way they smiled too wide. The way they avoided eye contact with certain men. The way they vanished from the scene altogether, without explanation. One girl told me she was leaving the industry, said she couldn't play the game anymore. She was gone within weeks, socials deleted. No one could reach her. That's when young Miami said she started to distance herself, slowly, carefully. You don't just walk away from someone like Diddy, she said. You fade out. Quietly, you make excuses. You play dumb. She admitted she still gets scared, still checks her surroundings, still wonders if speaking out, even this vaguely, will cost her. But I couldn't stay silent anymore, she whispered, because people don't know. They only see the yachts, the bottles, the glam. They don't see what's really going on behind the scenes. And then came the final words that left the audience frozen. I wasn't the only one who saw. I wasn't the only one who knew. I was just the only one willing to say it out loud. Silence. Just that. And the internet hasn't stopped shaking since. After that interview dropped, the internet exploded. Clips of young Miami's confession spread like wildfire. TikTok was flooded with theories. Twitter was on fire. Reddit threads popped up overnight, filled with users claiming they'd heard things or knew someone who went to one of those parties. But while the world reacted in shock and disbelief, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something darker. Within days, blogs that reposted her full statements started removing the videos. Entire accounts went mysteriously offline. One YouTuber who'd made a deep dive documentary connecting Diddy's past scandals to her recent statements had his video taken down, flagged for community guidelines violations within hours, despite having no explicit content. When he tried to re-upload, his account was suspended. It wasn't just the public reacting. It felt like someone was pulling strings. Young Miami herself didn't say another word. She went quiet on social media. No tweets, no stories, no appearances. Fans flooded her comments, asking if she was okay, begging for updates. Some even claimed she unfollowed certain people associated with Diddy's inner circle. Others noticed that she removed pictures from previous parties, the ones that used to be badges of luxury, like she was scrubbing her history clean. Then came the most chilling detail. A fan account posted a blurry photo outside a high-end Miami restaurant. It showed Diddy stepping out of a black SUV. Behind him, a man many claimed was one of the same masked figures described in Young Miami's story. He wore a dark suit, heavy sunglasses, and seemed to be watching, not walking. The post was deleted within an hour, but screenshots had already gone viral. People began asking, is this bigger than we thought? Was this just about elite parties, or was it about control, secrecy, and silence? The whispers got louder. Industry insiders began dropping vague hints in their own interviews. One R&B artist said, not everyone is playing by the same rules. Some of these parties aren't just parties. They're tests. A former bodyguard who claimed to have worked for a major mogul hinted at ritualistic behavior and VIP guests that never appear on guest lists. And suddenly, stories from years ago started resurfacing. Cassie's quiet departure, the lawsuits that disappeared, the artists who broke away and never looked back. The patterns were there. They'd always been there. But no one had ever connected the dots out loud, until now. The silence around Diddy wasn't just loyalty. It was fear. The kind of fear that keeps people in line. The kind that makes millionaires stay silent because they know money doesn't protect you from power. And yet, here was young Miami, breaking that silence. Maybe not with every detail. Maybe not naming every name, but just enough to shake the walls. By now, people had stopped asking if she was telling the truth. They started asking who else knew and when they'd speak. Because one thing was now undeniable. Once a truth like that escapes, it doesn't go back in the box. It spreads and it burns. As the days passed, the pressure grew heavier, not just on young Miami, but on the entire industry. News outlets began dancing around the edges of the story, carefully crafting headlines like Diddy faces scrutiny amidst viral allegations, or Young Miami sparks speculation with cryptic interview. They never said exactly what happened. They never used the word abuse or ritual or control, but everyone reading those headlines knew exactly what they were avoiding. Behind the scenes, industry insiders were panicking. PR teams were in overdrive, calling in favors, trying to control the narrative. Some even tried to discredit Young Miami subtly, calling her emotional, jealous, bitter. But her silence was louder than any smear campaign. She didn't clap back. She didn't post cryptic messages or subtweets. She simply disappeared, offline and unreachable. And that made people even more concerned. It didn't take long for other women, former dancers, assistants, backup singers, and event staff to start speaking anonymously. One woman posted a thread on a burner account, claiming she worked two of Diddy's New Year's Eve parties back to back. She described being told to sign an NDA before even entering the premises. She said she saw celebrities escorted through back entrances, some barely able to stand. She claimed she was instructed not to look anyone in the eye. "I thought it was just rich people being eccentric," she wrote, "but now I know I was in something darker." Another anonymous post described hearing a woman cry behind a locked door. When she reported it to a manager on staff, she was told, "You didn't hear anything. You don't want to lose your check, right?" And then came the most disturbing detail yet. A leaked internal memo from a high-end security firm hired to work one of Diddy's private events. The document didn't name names, but it mentioned Tier 1 confidential guests, blackout zones, and behavioral protocols in case of panic or distress. One line stood out: personnel are to intervene only upon directive from executive handler. No autonomous response permitted. Translation? If someone was in danger, the guards were told not to help, unless someone from the top said so. By now it was clear, these weren't just parties. They were carefully choreographed productions. Every light, every sound, every movement was calculated. Guests weren't there just to celebrate. They were part of a system, a structure built on secrecy, intimidation, and power, and all of it led back to the same name. Still, no formal statements came from Diddy, no interviews, no denials, just silence, strategic, cold, and deafening. Some speculated he was preparing legal action. Others thought he was planning to disappear until it blew over. But many believed something else, that he was watching, monitoring, waiting, like a chess master staring at the board, calculating his next move in a game he had played for decades. Meanwhile, the internet was on fire. Fan pages turned into investigative accounts. Old clips were being dissected frame by frame. That awkward moment in a 2015 interview? Suddenly, people were seeing it with new eyes. That cryptic lyric from a 2009 song? Now it felt like a confession hiding in plain sight. The illusion was shattering piece by piece. The man once hailed as the king of hip-hop was being recast in the public eye. Not as a mogul, but as a manipulator. Not a host, but a handler. And the scariest part? If this was all true, just how deep did it go? Because if Young Miami was brave enough to speak out, and she wasn't even the one directly harmed, what about those who were? What about the people who didn't have fame, or followers, or a platform? Where were they now, and why hadn't we heard from them? Yet, the breaking point came not with a headline, not with a news story, but with a single video. It wasn't high quality, it wasn't even clear, just shaky footage captured through a crack in a doorway. But it was enough. A woman, face blurred, voice disguised, sat hunched on a hotel bed. Her hands trembled as she clutched a folded piece of paper. She didn't say her name. She didn't need to. "I was there," she said. "I was at the parties. More than once. I saw things that no one should ever see." She went on to describe a world hidden in plain sight. Lavish villas turned into soundproof cages. Girls flown in under fake contracts. Security cameras in every room except the ones that mattered. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't rich. She had been promised a modeling opportunity. What she got was something else entirely. "They told me it was all for show, that the masks, the rules, the rituals, it was just part of the vibe. But the things I was asked to do, The people I was told to entertain, I couldn't forget it, and when I tried to leave, I was threatened. That video ignited something unstoppable. Suddenly, the silence that had choked the industry for years began to crack. Dancers, makeup artists, stylists. Anonymous posts turned into recorded testimonies. Some went to independent journalists. Others uploaded to social platforms, knowing their accounts would be banned but not caring anymore. Each story added a new piece to the puzzle. A pattern emerged. Women lured with glamour, locked into events they couldn't leave. Contracts that bound them to silence. Punishments for breaking the rules. Not physical, but psychological. Career threats, smear campaigns, financial blacklisting, and then it escalated further. One former assistant, protected by legal counsel, spoke to an underground podcast that dared to touch the story when mainstream media wouldn't. Her voice was calm, but her words were ice. There was a hierarchy, she said. Everyone knew their place, even celebrities. And Diddy wasn't just at the top. He was the architect. He designed it. He thrived on it. She spoke of a system of control disguised as luxury, a reward-punishment loop that kept people compliant. If you did what you were told, you got favors, features, invitations. But if you asked too many questions, you disappeared from the invite list, and eventually from the industry. All the while, Diddy remained publicly silent. But behind the scenes, legal teams were moving fast. Cease and desist letters, private investigators, deals to buy silence. But something had changed. People weren't scared anymore. They had seen the curtain pulled back, and now no one was willing to pull it shut again. Even those who once stood beside him began distancing themselves. Rappers unfollowed. Collaborators deleted photos. Former associates began posting vague but damning captions like, "Can't protect evil forever." It wasn't confirmation, but it was far from denial. Then came the real turning point. A letter leaked to the press. An anonymous former executive detailed internal documents from events planned by Diddy's team, timelines, guest lists, behavioral protocols. And on the last page, a name appeared. Not a celebrity, not a VIP, just a woman no one had ever heard of, listed with the word replaceable in bold red letters. It broke people. This wasn't about clout anymore. It wasn't about rumors. It was about lives, manipulated, controlled, and discarded like props in a twisted performance. And through all of it, young Miami remained quiet. But her silence was no longer seen as fear. It was respect for the others coming forward. She had opened the first door. The rest had walked through on their own. Now there was no going back. The question wasn't whether Diddy's empire would fall. It was how long it would take to hit the ground, and who he'd try to pull down with him on the way. The unraveling wasn't loud. It was slow, calculated, and hauntingly methodical. Diddy's brand, once untouchable, began to rot from the inside out. Endorsement deals quietly vanished. Brand collaborations pulled out with polite statements about reassessing partnerships. But the silence behind those statements was deafening. The cracks turned into gaping holes when a second, more polished expose aired on an independent news channel. This time it wasn't anonymous voices or pixelated clips. It was faces, real people on camera, breaking NDAs, risking careers, putting everything on the line. They were calm, controlled, and absolutely devastating. One woman, a former event planner who had worked closely with Diddy's team, spoke with her contract in hand. She showed documents with coded language, guest rankings, and protocol levels. If you made it past level 3, she explained, you weren't there for a party. You were there for a role, and that role often came with no script, only consequences. She spoke of girls who cried in makeup chairs trying to back out hours before showtime, only to be reminded of what they had signed. They knew they couldn't say no, not without losing everything. Another man, once a bodyguard, described witnessing scenes that haunted him long after he left. It was like watching a performance only you knew was real. People screaming through smiles, others pretending not to see. His final statement chilled the room. The most dangerous thing at those parties wasn't what you saw. It was what you learned to ignore. As these stories spread, the music industry reacted in waves. A prominent producer tweeted, then deleted, Been waiting 10 years for this moment. A former bad boy artist released a cryptic freestyle laced with lines that now read like confessions. People were no longer afraid to connect the dots. They were racing to do it before someone beat them to the truth. And then came the documents. Leaked financial reports, allegedly pulled from an encrypted server, revealed outrageous sums of money marked as entertainment logistics, hidden payments to private agencies, travel arrangements under shell companies, names tied to dates and locations that matched up almost too perfectly with the stories already out there. But the most damning detail? A list of pre-cleared guests for an event labeled only as Project V. Some of those names were massive, A-list, global, and while none had been directly accused of anything, the public didn't need more than that. The implication was enough. Social media exploded with calls for accountability. People weren't just asking for Diddy to respond. They were demanding to know how many others had known, how many had looked the other way, how many had helped keep the machine running. Meanwhile, whispers of federal investigations began to grow louder. Rumors of sealed indictments. Anonymous sources claiming subpoenas had already been issued. Whether true or not, the panic within Diddy's circle was visible. People were lawyering up. Others were vanishing from the public eye entirely. But Diddy? He remained elusive. No statements, no interviews. Just a single black square posted to Instagram, with the caption, "Sometimes silence is survival." It didn't help him. Comment sections turned against him. Former fans reposted videos calling him out. Petitions to remove his name from awards, honors, and Hall of Fame listings gained traction. Even some of his biggest offenders began to shift their tone, no longer claiming his innocence, just questioning the timing. And in the middle of it all, young Miami reappeared. No dramatic post, no interview, just a photo, a dimly lit selfie, eyes sharp, expression unbothered. The caption read, "I said what I said." That was all it took. The movement was no longer about a scandal. It was about the culture that let it happen, the structures that protected it, the people who stayed quiet while others were broken. And Diddy, he had become the symbol of something far larger than himself. Now, as new voices continued to emerge and the truth spilled faster than anyone could control, one reality became clearer with every passing day. This wasn't just the fall of a mogul. It was the reckoning of an empire built on silence, and silence finally had run out of time. The final blow didn't come from a news outlet or a celebrity expose. It came from the courtroom. The world had been watching, waiting, whispering, but now the whispers turned into transcripts. Depositions were leaked, names were named, and for the first time, the accusations were no longer clouded in rumor. They were sworn under oath. It started with a civil lawsuit filed by a former event coordinator. Buried within the legal jargon were raw, brutal allegations that mirrored everything young Miami had hinted at. Coerced silence, manufactured consent, emotional manipulation wrapped in the glitter of fame. But this time, it wasn't just hearsay. There were emails, there were texts, there were signed contracts. Suddenly, all the dots people had been trying to connect lit up at once. The lawsuit wasn't the only one. 2 more followed within days, this time from women who had worked as event companions, lured under the promise of networking opportunities and career mentorship. Their stories aligned almost perfectly, right down to the detail of being taken to side rooms, stripped of phones, and told, "This is how the industry works." By the time federal agencies confirmed they were conducting a formal investigation, the silence around Diddy snapped like a brittle thread. Networks canceled his appearances. Brands scrubbed collaborations. Radio stations stopped playing his tracks. Music videos that once dominated the charts were suddenly off playlists. And in the middle of this storm, more people started to speak. Not for revenge, but for redemption. One producer, who had worked with Diddy at the height of his career, went live on Instagram. No filters, no lawyers, just a confession. "I knew," he said, "not everything, but enough to feel sick. And I kept working with him. I kept quiet, because I thought that was the only way to survive in this business." His eyes welled up. "But silence is complicity, and I can't be complicit anymore." That live was shared millions of times. It triggered a domino effect. Small voices turned into a chorus. A documentary was rushed into production, not by a mainstream network, but by a grassroots team of survivors, journalists, and former insiders. Its working title? The House That Silence Built. And then the public turned inward. This wasn't just Diddy's reckoning. It was the industry's. People began asking, how many other powerful figures were operating just like this, protected by money, fame, and fear? How many more private parties were really systems of exploitation behind closed doors? Panel discussions erupted across platforms. Artists began demanding mandatory ethics clauses in performance contracts. Celebrities who had once flaunted their invites to Diddy's parties now found themselves defending why they stayed silent. The culture shifted, visibly, tangibly, permanently. But through all this, Young Miami never claimed the spotlight. She didn't drop a single, didn't monetize the moment. She simply let the storm rage. She didn't have to do anything else. She had already done the one thing no one else had the courage to do. She told the truth first, and now that truth had grown into something unstoppable. The glitz was gone, the smoke had cleared, and what stood exposed was the cost of a culture that rewards silence more than justice, fear more than integrity. For years, Diddy built an empire brick by brick, party by party, secret by secret. But in the end, it took one voice, trembling but brave, to pull it all down. The empire didn't just fall, it collapsed under the weight of its own shadows. And in that darkness, finally, light broke through. As the dust settled, something even more powerful than outrage began to rise. Awareness. The entertainment world had been rocked to its core, not just by the fall of a legend, but by the realization that the system protecting men like Diddy had existed for decades, hidden behind platinum records and red carpets. Now, for the first time, people weren't just talking, they were listening. Across Hollywood and the music industry, silence was no longer a safe place to hide. Executives who once sat comfortably in boardrooms began facing hard questions. Talent agents, producers, even venue owners, all being asked to explain what they knew and when they knew it. For the first time, NDAs weren't just shields, they were red flags. The culture of invincibility that once surrounded Diddy began to unravel in the minds of fans too. He wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a mirror reflecting everything the industry had allowed to fester. His curated image of power and charm, of being the life of the party, now felt grotesque. People started looking back at old interviews, old moments, through a new lens. That uncomfortable laugh, that odd comment, that lingering look. All of it now seemed like pieces of a puzzle that had been sitting in front of us all along. And while Diddy remained silent, something unexpected happened. Young artists began to speak out, not just about him, but about others who had used power to manipulate, control, and intimidate. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't need proof in the form of court documents. Their truth was their power. And for the first time, the world was listening without demanding perfection or polish. Among them were rising female rappers who had turned down exclusive invites to certain events. Male artists who had witnessed disturbing moments but never knew how to interpret them. Even influencers who had been flown out for branding opportunities only to find themselves in deeply uncomfortable situations. Now, they were naming those moments, claiming them, refusing to be ashamed. Industry veterans who had once been part of the machine began mentoring these voices, not to polish them, but to protect them. Conversations around consent, coercion, and psychological abuse became central in spaces they'd never been before. Label negotiations, marketing meetings, backstage lounges. The old rules were crumbling, and through it all, Young Miami became a symbol, not of perfection, not of victimhood, but of strength. She didn't try to control the narrative. She didn't seek vindication, but her choice to speak in a world designed to punish honesty sparked a cultural reset. She was seen not just as someone who told a story, but someone who made space for others to tell theirs. Meanwhile, Diddy's inner circle had all but evaporated. Some jumped ship early, trying to distance themselves. Others were forced out by public demand. Venues began removing plaques, radio stations replaced his tracks, and award shows faced mounting pressure to revoke his past honors. The institutions that once protected him were now scrambling to protect themselves. And yet, through all this chaos, a strange peace began to grow. The fear that once cloaked the industry had been pierced. People weren't whispering anymore. They were demanding change. Artists started calling for third-party event monitors. Studios committed to mental health services for talent. New artists learned what the veterans never had, that saying no is a right, not a risk. It wasn't a revolution born of anger. It was born of exposure. Because now the spotlight had moved. It was no longer on the stage. It was in the corners, the corridors, the shadows where silence had thrived. And in those places, people were finally starting to see. Diddy's fall had started with a whisper, but what followed was a roar that could no longer be silenced. And it was only just beginning. The ripple effect didn't stop at the music industry. It reached places no one had expected. Fashion houses, once eager to associate with Diddy's brand of luxury, began pulling archived campaigns from their websites. Luxury liquor brands, the same ones he helped turn into household names, issued carefully worded statements distancing themselves. Some even made quiet donations to women's advocacy groups, a clear signal they knew which way the tide had turned. But beyond the brands and headlines, something even more powerful was happening. Survivors, not just from Diddy's orbit, but from across the entertainment world, began finding each other. They formed quiet groups, private chats, support spaces where stories could be shared without judgment or legal threats. Some of these stories were decades old. Others were heartbreakingly recent. And the terrifying thing? So many of them were the same. Manipulation masked as mentorship, invitations that weren't really optional. The quiet pressure to comply, to smile, to be cool. What Young Miami had described was not an isolated case. It was a blueprint, one that had been passed around, protected, and perfected for years. But now that blueprint was being torn apart, line by line. In major cities, underground collectives started documenting testimonies. Former insiders, lawyers, and journalists began compiling data, creating a timeline of behavior and cover-ups. What started as a few stories soon turned into a full map. Events, names, dates, legal settlements, and the network of silence that linked them all together. And while mainstream media was still catching up, the public was already ahead. They no longer needed a breaking news alert to believe victims. They believed the patterns, the consistency, the courage it took to speak when so many forces worked to keep you quiet. Meanwhile, Diddy's empire continued to unravel. Former partners demanded audits. A longtime collaborator filed a lawsuit claiming he was pressured into silence under threat of career sabotage. Multiple legal teams cut ties. Some even released internal communications that revealed how long concerns had been raised and ignored. But the real shift wasn't in courts or contracts, it was in the culture. Award ceremonies began announcing new codes of conduct. Music festivals implemented stricter artist background checks. Studio spaces where private sessions had once been exploited were being restructured with transparency policies and third-party monitoring. For the first time, people were building an industry not on fame, but on accountability. And through all of this, Young Miami remained steady. She didn't need to re-explain her words. She didn't chase platforms or praise. She had done the unthinkable. She had survived telling the truth. And in a world built to punish that kind of honesty, her silence now echoed louder than any PR campaign ever could. The people who once mocked her, doubted her, or dismissed her as just another celebrity drama piece, they were now quoting her, referencing her, thanking her, because her voice cracked the door open, and everyone else kicked it down. What we're witnessing now is not just justice, it's transformation. The end of a culture where power meant immunity, where silence was safety, where abuse wore designer suits and smiled for the cameras. That world is ending, and in its place a new one is rising. Slower, more fragile, but finally rooted in truth. The fall of Diddy wasn't the whole story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where survivors don't whisper, they lead, and the world, at long last, listens. The storm didn't just change the landscape, it reshaped the ground beneath it. What began with whispers and shadows had erupted into a reckoning that no one could escape. And at the center of it all stood a man whose empire was built not just on music and fame, but on control, fear, and secrecy. Diddy was no longer just a name. He was a symbol of what happens when power goes unchecked for too long. As the legal battles intensified, the emotional fallout spread even wider. Artists who had once idolized him began publicly questioning everything they thought they knew. It wasn't just about guilt by association. It was about waking up to a system they had unknowingly served. Young musicians posted videos talking about how the industry glamorized abuse, how they'd been warned not to ask questions, how so many things they thought were just how it works now felt sinister in hindsight. Producers who once joked about wild nights were revisiting those memories with a different lens. Suddenly, the laughter didn't feel harmless. It felt like complicity. And then came the most powerful shift of all. The next generation refused to be silent. Young artists, fresh to the game, began rewriting the rules. They demanded fair contracts, full creative control, mental health clauses, and safe spaces. Women especially were no longer asking for respect. They were demanding it and backing it with the power of community. Labels that ignored abuse were called out. Venues that allowed exploitation were boycotted. Managers who protected predators found their phones stopped ringing. The culture that once protected giants now protected the vulnerable. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen easily. But it happened. And it continues to happen. Every time someone speaks out, every time someone listens without judgment, every time a story is believed before it's buried. As for Diddy, the silence surrounding him grew heavier with each passing week. Once the life of every room, now absent from every stage. His legacy, once measured in platinum hits, was now entangled in lawsuits, leaked videos, and testimonies that refused to fade. No final statement, no redemption tour, just the long, slow crumble of a man who once thought he could outpace the truth. But the legacy that rose from his downfall was something else entirely. A movement, not a moment. A shift, not a scandal. What Young Miami started when she dared to speak out didn't just expose a man, it exposed a machine. And the world, for the first time, didn't look away. We are watching an industry evolve in real time. The stories once whispered in fear are now spoken boldly. The pain once hidden in luxury is now fueling revolution. People are no longer afraid of losing access. They're afraid of losing integrity. In the end, this wasn't about cancel culture. It was about consequence. Not about destroying someone's life, but saving countless others. And as this chapter closes, a new one begins, written by the voices that refuse to be silenced, by the truth that refused to die, and by the survivors who turned their pain into power. Because this is no longer Diddy's story. It never truly was. This is the story of every person who was told to stay quiet and chose instead to speak.